Welcome to Better Bedtime Chronicles. You're listening to Nicole
and Bridget. Together we have 15 years experience working directly with families struggling with sleep challenges.
We share stories, advice, and deep dives into all things sleep. Let's go.
I am very keen to talk about this topic today of sleep perfectionism, anxiety around sleep. This is something I wouldn't have spotted or even known about my first few years in sleep consulting because it really took a while for it to take a shape and me to recognize and spot, we're being a bit of a perfectionist about sleep. And that can be a problem because, remember, we can't control how long our baby sleeps for or how long it takes them to fall asleep. So trying to control that and then ultimately failing, of course, we'll fail at it because it's not within our control, can feel so defeating, so heavy, and make sleep, whether you're sleep training or not, just feel absolutely anxiety inducing. And if you've ever gone to bed at night and put your head down and thought of things like, I don't even know if I should close my eyes because I don't know when my baby is going to wake up, or how much sleep I'm going to get tonight, or will they wake up in 10 minutes, or you wake up in the morning and try to predict your day and say, okay, if they nap for 1 hour at 9 and then for 40 minutes again at noon, then my day will go well. But of course, we're just trying to control things that are not up to us at all. And so what I see with clients, and I totally would have done this myself as a first-time mom, is absolute obsessing down to the minute over how much sleep the baby gets or lack thereof, doing things like adding up how many hours of naps they've had during the day and then feeling like a failure that it wasn't within this realm of normal. One good thing I really was happy to see from Health Canada and other folks who have information about age-appropriate sleep expectations, and this happened, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, is they changed this chart they had that had an exact number of how many hours of sleep a baby or a child at a certain age would need. They changed it to more of a ballpark. So I feel like that lifts a little bit of this unease when we think, okay, if they're sleeping between 14 hours and 16 hours a day is a bit of a ballpark compared to only 15 hours, just as an example. But I still find a lot of people are really ultra focused and fixated on this number that's not happening. And I think to really dive in deep to this, we have to look at what we're carrying in terms of our baby's sleep failures. It ties in with the success. I'm kind of using quotations like you can see me, but the success that we might feel. So if your baby had a really good night of sleep, we can take credit for that success and say, oh, great, I must have done ABC right and now my baby slept. And then, of course, if you mimic that exact thing the next night, it might have a very different outcome. As we know with babies, you can have the same variables and the different outcome with sleep each time. But a helpful piece as we dive into this is if you can separate yourself from that success, it's a little easier to separate yourself from sort of that failure that you might be feeling because, again, it's not up to you. And so if we're going to shoulder all that happiness from good sleep, of course, you're going to be 10 times harder on yourself when things don't go according to plan.
That's such a good point because I feel like oftentimes when clients get to us, you know, they're like having these giant notes apps in their phone where they're just like listing every single thing that's happening from the day, counting all the minutes. They come to us and they say, well, 3 days ago, you know, he wore this sleep sack. And so I think that might've been the thing. And so now I can't wear this other sleep sack because that, and, you know, and we get really stuck in the weeds on this stuff. And you're right. It's all about control. It's all about like the outcome of my day will change based on how much sleep this baby has. And so I need to control every piece that I can to maximize for this, like, again, an invisible success that, you know, you're working towards. And it's just not sustainable as a parent, right? It creates, like, you know, it creates anxiety. It creates mental health issues. And I mean, sleep perfectionism is connected to sleep anxiety, which we'll talk about later.
Mm-hmm. It absolutely festers too, day over day of this. If you can imagine feeling like, and you might have felt this way yourself before, or you know someone maybe who does, but day over day of that feeling like a failure or feeling like, oh, they didn't get enough sleep, and then you carry that like your own burden, like that's a heavy load to carry. So hopefully we can lighten that load for you and take certain things off your shoulders like, feeling like you can be in control of these things, and instead focus on the pieces that you can control: where your baby sleeps, how often they sleep, how you respond to your baby. These are the things that you can do.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us more about that? Like, dive into that a little bit. Like, what should we let go of, and what should we hold on to?
So this is a feeling I remember very vividly too, when your baby's napping and they stir too soon.
Oh my God, I hate that feeling.
Yeah, you can
It's dread.
tell.
It's
dread.
in your tummy, right? Like, it's deep.
It's a physical, like, ooh, they're stirring, and then they maybe wake up, and now they're having a shorter nap, and now we're worried the day is going to be terrible. Which, depending on how old your baby is, there's different things you can do, because we love to preserve a nap that's already happening and try to make it longer. But babies get to a point where they're not going to let you do that, and they're only going to sleep, X hours or minutes for that nap, and that's all we can do is accept it. So I think some acceptance and knowing that I can't predict how my day is going to be. And in fact, tell yourself, I like to say to our clients, as soon as you wake up in the morning, and we again don't really know what that wake up time is going to be these first few days of sleep training. But even sleep training aside, when you wake up in the morning, say, I don't really know how my day is going to look today, because all I can do is offer sleep in this particular space, in this particular way, and respond to my baby accordingly. That's all I can control. The rest is up to them. Mm-hmm. And we want to make sure we're really treating them as just that. They're their own little person. They're going to do their own thing, and we can only control the parameters around that. And I'll flip ahead to toddler and preschool sleep too, because that can be a tricky one too, especially with bedtime showdowns or delays, stalling, and that sort of thing. Can be really frustrating and then take away what would be some of that sleep time in the evening. But again, remember, you can only control certain things, how you respond to those requests, those demands. I had a client earlier this week that they wanted the light on, like the overhead light in the room on all night long. And those are things we can control and say, no, that's not available. And maybe they're upset in that moment, but it's still something that we can control, whether or not that light is on, because we know that light's not going to help them have a sound night of sleep.
Yeah, so it's kind of like I think a bit of it is just like picking your areas of focus, right, and then detaching yourself from the things that don't matter so much. It's interesting. I think about this whole thing, this whole sleep perfectionism thing, and I think it's born from the reality that, like, before we had kids, we were, like, out productive members of the world, doing our things, meeting our tasks that we were given by work or by whatever you're up to before you had kids. There were things that you were expected to do, and you were able to do them, right? Adults without children have lots of control. But once you are responsible for another human being, that all goes out the window. And all of a sudden, especially if you're on like a maternity or paternity leave, your only task in a day is this little blob in front of you. And so all of a sudden, like, the only measure you have of like self-efficacy and self-esteem and productivity and how great you are is whether this baby like makes it through the day. And so it becomes really easy to attach kind of like meaning and value to the outcomes that you produce with this child you have. But that's unrealistic. They're human beings, right? And we really can't control, and we shouldn't tie ourselves to their successes and failures. Again, I'm using air quotes here.
Yeah, our worth, right? Our worth is not reflected. And I think well-meaning people can contribute to that with how are they sleeping? Are they a good sleeper?
Is it a good baby? How many times?
No, it's a terrible baby.
A million times. Like, this is the worst baby. I don't know.
I know it can, and of course they mean well, right? But those kind of questions and those thoughts, of course, and that's a good point too, Nicole, is like we're used to having control. I love especially the type A clients that we get that are, and you can tell the notes right away. Are they a teacher or they're a nurse or something, and they really know, are used to having things really scheduled and down to a T, but that's just not the reality of baby sleep.
Mm-hmm. And it sucks. That's a hard reality to face. And, I think a big component of this is the way that like postpartum depression and anxiety plays a role in sleep perfectionism. Because, of course, perfectionism is often a symptom of anxiety. And there's a lot of crossover between our clients who are struggling with their mental health and our clients who are aiming for sleep perfectionism. So I think that's an important thing to chat about.
That brings up a very good point that I one of the many reasons I'm so grateful for you and the other social workers on our team, because sleep consulting is not a regulated practice, as we know. And my first couple years went pretty smooth, but I remember finding myself in a few situations that felt out of my comfort zone with that sort of piece. Like there's definitely a possibility of anxiety or some postpartum depression going on. And so to have social workers on the team to be able to navigate those sorts of challenges as they relate to sleep, or even just in general, because you guys are all therapists and have your therapy practices as well, is just such a gift to have these things married together, because they really are weaved together.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, because, sleep and eating are kind of the two main sources of anxiety for new parents. A lot of times in the perinatal mental health field, that's a big focus, is trying to regulate anxiety associated with those things. So these things really, really do go hand in hand. And certainly control's a big part of it.
And the diapers too, right? It's like,
Diapers,
did they go enough? They haven't pooped
Peas
in
and
4
poops.
days. Yeah, right. The things we get so, and I think at the beginning, especially the first couple of weeks, there's merit in really making sure the plumbing's working well, things are going well in that realm. But then it becomes, sometimes that obsession doesn't end. And then the notes, as the months go on or even years go on, are just as detailed, down to the minute, down to the exact ounce of milk or the shred of cheese they had on the plate. And which, for some find that helpful, that's great. But of course, we're working with people who are not finding all of that helpful. And that's, by the time they reach us, we're, hoping to shine a light on that.
Yeah. So a big part of our role is to support parents to accept what they can't control, which is a really hard thing to do.
And isn't that wisdom for life? I feel like I sometimes have to remind myself that with things outside of our kids and our sleep, is like we just can't control certain things, and that's a hard one.
Mm-hmm. I think it's probably important to talk about what the difference is between, just your average worry around sleep and when it turns into something that is probably worth seeking support for from a medical professional, from a therapist, even from friends and family, maybe grab some medication, whatever.
I like that.
Would that be worthwhile?
I think so. So an example of maybe what would be a normal worry or thought about sleep, and what would be more like maybe an intrusive thought or something that would be in the realm of anxiety.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a couple things that are important to chat about. So one thing is, it's normal to have worries, for sure. All parents worry. That's a common condition. When the worries become all encompassing, so you can't escape them, they plague you, they become a burden, you don't get a break from them, you spend the majority of your day with your thoughts focused around these worries. Those are kinds of maybe a difference between what would be a normal postpartum worry and then something that could be considered postpartum anxiety and depression. Certainly postpartum anxiety, depression come along with other symptoms. So, you'll notice things like if you're leaning towards the depressed side of things, it'd be severe sadness, depressed mood swings, excessive crying, having trouble bonding with your baby. This is a huge one. Parents will often feel tremendous guilt about not feeling connected to their baby, not feeling like they love their baby or that they want to spend time with them, just doing anything they can to be separate from their baby. Often those types of severe feelings can be associated with postpartum depression and anxiety. Mm-hmm. Not wanting to spend time with friends and family and not being interested in the things that you used to enjoy doing, struggling with eating, sleeping, sleeping too much, not sleeping enough, eating too much, not eating enough, any sort of differences in physical behaviors, I guess, feeling exhausted. And then anxiety, anxiety and depression go hand in hand. And I think right now the current language is postpartum depression and anxiety. And the anxiety would be things like Bridget mentioned. So intrusive thoughts. Intrusive thoughts, it deserves its own podcast episode, but it's super important. And I just want to make a plug for intrusive thoughts, which is there's some statistic, and I'm going to get this wrong because I don't remember exactly, but it's something so big. It's 90% of women in the postpartum period, and by women I mean birthing parent, in the postpartum period, experience intrusive thoughts, which would include things like thoughts of their child dying, thoughts of them hurting their child accidentally, really severe, serious thoughts of sometimes like very disturbing things happening to their children, all sorts of stuff that are quite severe. And it's like 90% of women have these thoughts. And what's really interesting about that is that that's not something that's talked about a lot. A lot of women don't acknowledge or can't admit that they've had those thoughts because it feels so scary. And you're like, wait a minute, like, why did I just think that really fucked up thing? Does that mean I'm going to hurt my kid? Like, these are the scary things that we think when we're in that like period, right?
And it feels so scary. And to hear you just name it and call it what it is refreshing, because at least in my earlier years with being a mom, no one said anything, and you feel like a freak.
Yeah.
Like, what is wrong with me that I'm... And I remember going to a class, a postpartum fitness class with Oh Baby Fitness, and I remember her saying, and she would totally tell this to anyone too, that one of her intrusive thoughts was the stove was going to blow up, or somehow that something was going to happen to the oven, because the oven was below-ish where one of the kids slept. And I was like, oh my gosh, this person also feels insane. Thinks insane things too, or had this crazy, what feels like a crazy thought. But thank you for like normalizing that, because it's so crippling to feel that.
It's horrifying. I told this story like really recently to my contractor in my house when we're renovating upstairs. I'm sure he cared deeply about it. But one of my most intrusive thoughts, so we have a railing like upstairs, and when you walk from my room where the baby and I were into the nursery where I like would change their bums and whatever, you have to walk by this banister, and it was too low. It's not to code. So it would come up to like just below my hip. And I, every single night that I walked down that hallway, would carry this baby, and I would have two visions. I'd either have a vision of me accidentally tripping, falling over the banister, and both of us like plummeting to our deaths. We need a trigger warning on this episode.
Yes.
Or I would have a vision of me throwing my baby down the stairs. And like, I cannot tell you how fucking scary that was for me, because I was like, and I'm a mental health professional. Like, I know this, right? Like, I learned all this in school. But when you're at 3 a.m. in the middle of the night with your first kid, like thinking these terrifying thoughts, like, that's really scary. And of course, nobody talks about it.
No, they don't.
So I'm here to tell you, we all have those thoughts. It's exceptionally common. It doesn't, just because it's common doesn't mean it has to happen for you, though. So if you are really struggling with those thoughts, if they're more than just fleeting, if they're burdening you, if you're feeling like they're like really weighing you down, occupying your time, just seek support. Talk to literally anybody. Tell your partner, tell your midwife if you're still seeing one, tell your family doc, tell your OB, tell literally anybody that this is what's going on. All of them will tell you, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. That's very normal. I can help. And then you move forward from there and get the support that you need, because that is not the kind of stuff that you want to be carrying around.
Yeah, it's heavy. But you brought up something too, like as a trained professional and you know this stuff, you still experience these thoughts. And we get lots of clients who are trained in a similar capacity, and you sometimes just need that outside voice to talk you through it, because it just can feel isolating, and it can feel very overwhelming to think of something so horrific and you visualize it, right? You can picture it in your mind, and why am I thinking these things? So no matter what our background is, and the experience we have, it's still, I think, good to challenge ourselves and say, is this normal, or is this something I should talk about? And so don't be shy.
Yeah, it's super important to
share it.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly it. Just share it. Talk about it. And that's what we're doing here too, right? Like, I share that story to my contractor and to you, just to normalize that like these thoughts exist. And I'm a good parent. Like, I don't have any qualms about that. So I know that even wonderful parents can struggle with this kind of stuff.
Yeah, we all do, right? Okay, all this said, what can we do if we are a sleep perfectionist, or we're experiencing sleep anxiety, and we're just finding that it's holding us down or making us feel some kind of way? The first thing you want to do is have developmentally appropriate expectations for where your baby or where your child's at today, or at this time that you're listening to this. What age are they? Are we expecting a little too much from them, like maybe going all night without a feed when they're not weighing enough, or they're not old enough to actually do that? So let's ask ourselves that question first. Am I being realistic with my expectations.
And please don't read into this story that your best friend's sister told you about their 2-month-old who slept through the night and then never looked back and life was beautiful and perfect, right? Like that happened and that's great and that's awesome, but that's not everybody's story. It's not necessarily developmentally realistic. How many times, Bridget, does someone call and say, oh, I want my baby to sleep through the night? And then I say, well, how many times are they eating? And they answer, and I'm like, oh, actually, that's super reasonable for a 6-month-old. And they're like, really?
Yes.
I'm like, yeah. Like it's okay that your kid still eats at night. That's pretty normal.
Pretty normal, pretty healthy, which is why like an initial screening or intake's a big deal, because it's really, sometimes there's really no issue at all, and it's more of our perspective. And we know too that a parent who's experiencing sleep challenges themselves are more likely to report those with their children, even if there's nothing going on. So just think about your expectations. And if you're not sure, always speaking with a caregiver, of course, you're welcome to ask us too. We have loads of resources ready for you. But yeah, just thinking about that. And then letting go, this is a tough one. Okay, this is a hard pill to swallow, but letting go of the control over the length of your baby's sleep and how long it takes them to fall asleep. That's not up to you. It's not up to us. Doesn't matter what, someone could have us booked in for the whole night and really have the support there. We still cannot control that. So let's take away that heavy bag we're carrying of trying to control those two things, and instead let's get focused on the things we can control. Where your baby sleeps, trying to put them down in the same space for sleep as much as you can. If you're home and you can, great. If you're out and stuff, don't sweat it. You got to live your life, no problem there. So we're looking at the space that our baby's sleeping in. We're providing a safe surface for them. It's firm, it's free of clutter. We can be confident that they're safe, sure. So we can control that. We can also control the timing. So let's get curious about your baby's tired cues. Are we seeing red-rimmed eyes, glazed over eyes? One of our clients years ago called them honey dip eyes. So just really glazed over, staring out into space, pulling ears, jamming their forehead into you. We're seeing clear cues. Are we offering sleep early enough, or are we missing our window? And that would look like really cranky, crying, sort of jittery arm movements. For older children and toddlers would be hyperactivity, clumsiness. They kind of tell their best jokes, just absolutely berserk. Are we missing this window of timing where we'd get their sweet spot, let's say, where they would go down much easier? So the timing, again, is something we can control. And then the routine prior to bed. Are we putting in an effort of time for connection together and making sure their needs are met? So let's say your baby requires a bit of physio or maybe needs some special lotions before bed. You would incorporate that into your routine. Maybe there's a story, maybe there's the physio, a feeding, a bath, whatever, all these things you do. But the key is that they're the same order every night. A, B, C, D, over and over every night. Less important who does that, and more important that they happen, and they happen in that same order. That's something powerful that you can control. And then the last piece, which we talked about on our last episode, was about how do we respond to this baby, right? So we can't control if they're going to be upset or they're going to resist our sleep, but we can control how we respond to them. Do we give them a couple minutes? Do we go in on occasion? Do I pick them up? Did picking it up make it worse? Yikes, I'm going to instead lay a heavy hand on instead of picking up. So getting curious about this response. So just to summarize that, these pieces that you can control is having good expectations, start right out of the gate, having good timing for your baby's sleep, and making sure you're doing some trial and error there if you're not sure, and making sure that you have a good, effective routine leading up to bed, and that you're particular with how you respond to your baby.
Yeah, I mean, we speak at length about consistency. That's like the number one thing. If you literally did nothing else but were consistent, it would be fine. And so that consistency is really key. And then what happens, though, is like parents are like, well, I screwed that up. I wasn't consistent. I made this mistake, or I did that. And then they really, really hammer it home and beat themselves up about it, right? And so I think like a piece of this is, I say this a lot in my newborn conversations, which is like, consider yourselves, like Bridget said, be curious. Consider yourselves like, you're experimenting here and you're trying something and you're giving it a go. And if it doesn't work out or whatever, okay, no big deal. We move on. We try again the next day. Every day is a new, fresh day. So we don't need to like sit with like the failures, again, air quotes, that we've committed during the day. Like, we don't need to sit with those. Those are just something that we tried, didn't work out, we move on, we'll try again tomorrow. And so giving ourselves a break when we sidestep or when we make, again, air quotes, mistake. Like, these things are not issues. It's not a problem. We can just move on and try again.
Yes, I love that. And babies are so resilient. Every sleep really is, as you said,
Yeah.
a fresh start, a new opportunity. And not only give grace to yourself with this as you're learning about it and trying to kind of navigate what works well for your baby, but I would encourage, this is easier said than done, encourage you to do that to the help you have in your home, whether it be a
Yeah.
partner, an in-law, a grandparent, whatever. Because if they're, let's be honest, they're not going to do it the way you exactly would do it, or it might, they might have a different idea there. And if they do step out of this routine that you're going for, we're going to give them a bit of grace too. You might talk with them about it, sure, but we're going to know the next sleep is a new opportunity. Babies are so resilient. You can have that bit of change there because it can be, especially let's say the ice dispenser is a big one in my house. Was someone used the frickin' old ice dispenser, which would wake somebody up, and I'd be furious. Like, you just woke up the baby. It took me forever. Oh my God. But then really it's like, okay, I'm pissed for a minute, but now we need to move on because it's done. And it does nobody any favors to hold on to that and be furious about that all day, multiple days and weeks. Remember the time of that frickin' ice dispenser, right? It's just not worth the heaviness. So trying to let it go. And something my grandma I always say, these are my sleep clinics for adults too, is something my grandma still says now when there's something in front of us, and that is like, the time is going to go by anyway. You might as well do something and look at sleep in a similar light. The nights, the naps, they're going to go by anyway. So only work on what you can control and do something with the pieces that you can control.
Mm-hmm. You really just brought up a great point, because sleep perfectionism often causes relational conflict. So often do I talk to clients about how annoying their partner is because they can't blah, 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 blah. And this is like a real problem with families, right? Because there is typically a primary parent, the person who's in the home, the one who's responsible for all of the, schedule and planning, and also the one who has the biggest impact if things go awry, right? So you keep kid up too late, all of a sudden they're up super early. Now that parent's the one who has to deal with a crabby kid for the day. So there's a parent who's more deeply invested in the routine, typically in a partnership. And when the other partner is trying to help or trying to be involved or trying to take an active role, but the parent who's struggling with sleep perfectionism isn't able to allow them to try things out and to be involved, that can create a really complicated and frustrating dynamic. The primary parent feels overwhelmed and frustrated and needs help and wants support, but also isn't maybe offering the opportunity for the secondary parent to be involved in the way that they want to. And I always have to come across this thing where I say to families, like, listen, everybody is going to be a little different, have a little bit of a different strategy. You can have the same goals, you can have the same routine, whatever. But if, dad wants to roughhouse before bed and I want to cuddle, whatever. He can parent the way he wants to parent. He's also the perfect parent for these children, or, whatever the case may be. So in that scenario, there's value in letting your other partner, if you're the sleep perfectionist, just try and do their own thing and do it their own way. You don't have to carry that yourself.
I like that. Let them kind of awkwardly fumble their way through, because even if in the moment it doesn't look the way you want it to, letting that happen day over day or every other day or whatever your routine looks like within your family will allow you a lot of freedom in the coming months, right? Of being able to walk away while they do bedtime routine, let's say. Share it. Yeah. So you can, for me, it was never anything significant. I'd go to the store alone or whatever, and which would feel so awkward. But when you're the only person tied to your baby's sleep, that can be really isolating, and that's a lot for you to carry on your shoulders. So even though it's a bit uncomfortable and not the exact way you would do it, we would definitely encourage you to try to get a tiny bit uncomfortable and see if you can let someone else help you with that.
I always say you never want to be the only person who can comfort your baby. That is not the place you want. That's not good for the baby. It's not good for you. Have that strong bond. Awesome. Other people can also care for them well.
Yeah. And it's good. I think it's a win-win. And in the moment, it can feel like a lot of feelings. We could go on and on about all of that. But when you let someone else help, whether it be a partner or a relative, or even a hired, you have someone who helps you, a mother's helper or a doula or someone in the house with you, they get to help. They get to feel good about helping. You get a tiny bit of reprieve, and your baby gets to be a little more adaptable with that. So don't be afraid to do that, even though it can feel really uncomfortable. Of course, they probably prefer you, at least still to this day. If my kids could pick who does story most nights, it's going to be mom, sure. They might have a preference there. They probably do, but that doesn't mean that somebody else wouldn't do a great job as well.
Yeah, that's really important. I want to talk about one last thing before we wrap up today, which is a concept that I use a lot in therapy, which can really help when we're struggling with like sleep perfectionism, anxiety around sleep, all of that stuff. This is the concept of radical acceptance. So oftentimes, parents are making all of these, perfectionist choices, tracking sleep excessively, obsessing over timing and hours and minutes and all of these things, these choices that we've been talking about that can be really challenging to cope with because they're trying to control. And they think that by doing something, they're doing something, right? The idea of radical acceptance is that the actual, most radical thing you can do is make an active choice to accept what's happening. So instead of it being like an option between doing something and doing nothing, it's not that. Like you're making an active choice to be chill, to be cool with this. And by feeling like you're making a decision, you're choosing acceptance rather than being forced into acceptance or rather by passively accepting. No, this is an active choice that you're making as a parent. It's the best choice for you. It's the best choice for your child. When you frame it that way, it can be really empowering to accept instead of feeling defeatist.
Because that choice is the action.
Exactly.
I like that. That's deep.
Yeah, it's a cool concept. And if you're into that, like say that idea vibes with you, if you Google or like YouTube radical acceptance, there's all sorts of like really cool kind of like mindfulness tapes you can listen to about it, anywhere from like 2 minutes to 20 minutes where you just listen to someone talk about radical acceptance and the value that it holds. This is a concept that's super helpful right across the board for anybody struggling with any sort of control issues, which P.S. aren't we all?
Yeah, right. Easier said than done, for sure.
Yeah. So check that out. Like radical acceptance, I love that skill.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to leave it too, because it's still, you're taking action even though it might not seem that way traditionally. So I really like that. Hopefully you found this helpful. I can imagine some of you have been in this boat before, or maybe you are right now. Certainly both Nicole and I have been there too. So we're coming at this from a place of we get how hard it is, but hopefully you can find some helpful info here to get you take this heavy bag off of your back, off your shoulders, and instead just focus on what you can control instead of what you can't.
Yeah, it gets easier. It definitely gets easier. And yeah, there's light at the end of the tunnel if that's where you are right now. Thanks for listening. Just remember, this shit is hard, but you are killing it.
To stay in touch, you can find us at betterbedtime.ca.